Welcome, everybody. We're working on Unit 6 this evening. The topics you can see listed right here at the top of the unit folder. Uh, Basically, we're looking at some additional HTML elements and the CSS box model. So we'll get into that pretty heavily in just a little bit. We're also going to talk about some site design basics and considerations, including this concept of wireframing, kind of like let's call it a brief intro to UX design. And then some accessibility concerns. And then there's also some material in this unit about the web developer career path that I don't plan on recording into this video, but I have a rich set of links at the bottom of the page I would like you to explore, especially if you're brand new to this, to kind of dip your toes in the water of what we do as a profession in this area. All right, so this is our topic list. I'm going to kind of dive down here to the entries I have in the course show and use this as kind of our lecture guide. And I'm going to talk about these first two tags, and then I'm going to get into coding in just a little bit here. When we code in HTML, and so far we've been using a combination of like the basic HTML tags, right? So think of like an H1 or a paragraph or an anchor tag for a link or an image tag for an image or a UL with an LI for like a bullet list of items. We've also learned about tables and forms. And you'll notice that a lot of those tags, along with the semantic elements of like header, footer, main, etc., that stuff, those tags kind of describe the content that goes into them, right? And that's not accidental. That's the design of the HTML language. But in building things on the web, sometimes you put content on the page that doesn't necessarily either fit one of the categories. Like, well, it's not really a paragraph, and it's not really an image, and it's not really, a video, for example. And you'll learn later there's audio and video tags and things like that. And what happens when I just need to build a container that maybe just holds an image and a paragraph and a video and maybe a form? Like I want to containerize all that and put it neatly together in one little package. Well, they do have a generic container tag in HTML called the div element. And, and I was wrestling with this little piece here, right? The section grouper title. And I like to think of it as a generic container. And I want you to notice the highlighted text here, generic block level container. And this is the thing that we're going to start to get into here. And I'm just going to go to my launch page right now and go to the work I did last week. And I want to start talking about what block level means, right? This is a really important concept in HTML because we create certain tags. And I'm just going to look at the source code like this, right? We create certain tags, and some of the tags are what we call block level, and some of them are what we call inline, right? Generally speaking, I'll start with the inline first. Take a look at like the bold tag right here. Green Bay Packers sits inside of a paragraph, right? I put bold tags around it, and we know what that does, right? It makes the text a little bolder. But that tag, that bold tag, is what we call an inline element. In other words, it sits in line with the text inside of some other element, typically. There's all sorts of them that we use, right? So, and I kind of hammer on this paragraph here because there's a bunch of them. I have the mark tag, the strong tag, I have an italics and an M tag here, and I even have a subscript tag, and all of those are considered inline elements. In other words, they're in line with the text or the content. And when I use that tag, whatever follows that tag will appear directly after it in line with that information. So for example, if I look at that paragraph here, and I recognize, okay, well, that has a bold tag on it. That's an inline tag. Immediately after it closes, the text just keeps going right on the same line. It's in line with the material, right? So it doesn't push the content down. Conversely, when you look at a tag like the paragraph tag, anything that follows the paragraph tag will be pushed down below that paragraph. So when I look at it here on the page, this paragraph, wherever it happens to end, now this one conveniently, at least at this zoom level, ends right, was ending at the end of the screen. I zoomed out one click, but it ends here. And because the paragraph ends here, the next element that comes onto the page begins below it. And so this concept of, like, for example, a paragraph is a block level tag. And the way I always think about it is a block level tag occupies the entire width of the container holding it. In this case, the container for the paragraph ultimately is the main tag, right? And then the main tag is contained by the body tag. And the body tag is contained by the HTML tag. The body tag is a block level element. The header is, all of these H tags are headers. The nav is a header. Anchor tags, by the way, are not, because I can put links in the middle of a paragraph, right? But this paragraph is occupying 100% of the width, or the allowable size that the container will allow it, provided the fact that it's inside that container. Ironically, the body occupies the whole width of the page, the main tag occupies the whole width of the page, and then the paragraph also occupies the whole width of the page. Now, a div tag, being unlike, let's say, a paragraph or a block quote or a header tag or a section tag or a main tag or a nav tag that doesn't have semantic meaning attached to it, is a generic container. And I think I mentioned this before we had these semantic tags of like nav and header. What designers would do is we would create a div tag and then just give it an ID of header, right? And people did that so often that eventually when HTML5 came out, they're like, why don't we just make a tag called header? Because everybody makes div header, div ID header, and div ID footer and div ID nav. And so that's where the semantic tags came from originally. However, there's still usage for a div tag. So, like, especially when you're trying to take a bunch of information and put it into one structure, and more importantly, either style it collectively or position it collectively. And that's really kind of the grand use of a div. A div is a block level element, though. So, and it indicates here, right? It says a div is an empty box, meaning it has no meaning on its own. There's no semantic meaning to it, but it's useful for organizing stuff into logical sections, right? And in the old days, we would use a header, a sidebar, main content, right? But now we have semantic tags for that. So really, you should use the semantic tags for that, but there's still times when you'll need a generic container. A block level element, right, always starts on a new line. It takes up the full width of its parent container. And that's probably a better way to say it, right? Whatever, if like my paragraph is inside of a main tag, it'll take up the full width of that main tag, that whatever width that main tag is set to. They don't always have to be the full width screen. And indeed, if you look at a well-designed website, I'm just going to use the BBC News website here as kind of a example. You'll notice, right, that, well, they have some content that seems to go across the screen, but you notice how they kind of group their content together? Like they have these articles, and I'm not really reading the articles here, right? This is happenstance, whatever happens to pop up on the screen here. But you notice how, like, this is all one little collection of content, and this is all one little connection of content, and so is this, right? And you notice, like, what a news site does really well is, first of all, the content part of the page never goes to the edge of the screen. That's kind of interesting, right? So the main content of this site does not occupy the full width of the screen. Here's the why. Human eyes don't like that. When we're reading content, we like paragraphs that are narrow visually, not wide. Think of any newspaper that you pick up, whether it's like a tall newspaper or a small one or even a magazine, and you leaf through it. Why is it that newspapers put their stuff into columns? It's because they know from historical like research probably that most people's eyes, when we're reading across the screen, this is a lot harder to read all the way across. And then you go to the next line, go all the way across. By the time you get to like, I don't know, somewhere in the middle of this text, and you jump back over to the edge, it's like, oh wait, which sentence was I on? Right? Your eye loses track. So one of the things that designers on the web do is they mimic print media, because the print people figured it out long before we did, that narrow content is good. Chunking up your content, not having like a paragraph that's like 3 pages long, is also not good. Like newspapers will have like 2 or 3 sentences in a paragraph, maybe 5 at the most, and then they move on to another paragraph. It's just easier for the eye to read it if it's narrow and it's broken apart. So the visual space is good, the narrowness is good, especially for reading. There's other times where you do want to use the full width of the screen, but it depends. But this concept is, right, that certain tags have by default block level behavior. The other thing that you'll notice here is that you can use, for example, a div to contain information that you don't have a semantic tag for, but still give it meaning. And in this case, they're putting a class tag on it, but I can group like that H2 and the paragraph together and then collectively style it as one object. I can put a border around it. I can give it a background color. I can lay it out whatever way I wish. I can give it a specific width and keep it from being like this one long sentence across the screen. That's kind of the point of it, right? So it gives us what I often say is like a layer of encapsulation for content, and that extra layer of encapsulation gives us a greater level of control. Simply as that. There's a link here to the W3 schools, and I suppose we could probably look at that really quick. They have some neat examples here of kind of like what we were talking about and how you can apply it to create a container that is containerized, right? Now you will notice that this container here, they did not declare a width, and because it's block level, it will fill the whole width of the screen. Notice the H1 element sits above it, the paragraph sits below it, right? Because they're not in line. And then if I wish, right, and I'll just kind of do this just to demonstrate, I can take that width and I can narrow it up, and I can set, either pixels. There's a number of different ways you can do it. I'm just going to use pixels because that's kind of the go-to default for typically for doing this stuff. But notice how I'm able to take that content and narrow it up. And then if I'm doing a design, now I have room for other boxes next to it. So I can squeeze a couple things in. And on top of it, it is possible to also make those boxes, let's say responsive as well, right? We're not quite there yet, but that's what we're building up to. In other words, like if I throw this on a phone, like this would work better on a phone than the previous version, perhaps. That's the thinking. Although you can set things to dynamically adjust. We'll get to that as we kind of move forward. All right, so that's kind of the div tag. And then we also have a generic tag called the span tag, which is the inline equivalent to the div tag, right? So now remember that when we were looking at source code here, like this bold tag is an inline tag, and this mark tag is an inline tag because it's in line with the text, right? And anything that follows or precedes that tag still stays on the same line of text. Really important ones to remember that a lot of people assume sometimes they're block level tags, but they're not, is the anchor tag, the tag that we use to do links. Those are inline tags. Image tags also are inline tags. That's kind of interesting. So if you're looking at my Green Bay Packer page here, and I am zoomed in, this is how wide this image is. If I had another image put, let's say in my code, right below this line of image code. If there was room on the screen, that image would appear here. It would not appear below. It would appear next to it, right? And this is like, one of those things you run into, like, oh, I thought it was going to go down there. Well, one way to fix it, guess what, is you can put it in a div tag, right? But this is the kind of understanding the difference between the block level, once again, and the inline. So the inline tag, when you have a generic one, you can do kind of things like this, right? So here's a paragraph with some text, and then I can set up a span tag. And what's very typical with the span tag, by the way, is we usually add either a class or an ID to it. And then, oh, right. Oh, I hate that little effect there. All right. I shouldn't highlight within those boxes, basically in Brightspace. But whenever we do that, we close the tag and everything inside there. So very important, would grab the style that we apply to highlight. And here's some CSS, right? So we can control it basically with CSS. Also, because we put either a class or an ID on it, we can also control it with JavaScript when we get to that point. And this is really useful. Another thing that sometimes people will do is they'll actually put in a span tag and put a style tag directly in there. And that's typically done inside of content management systems like WordPress or Drupal, for example, and only really recommended where you have no control over the style sheets, which is actually kind of rare, right? So, but this is pretty useful. So, for example, I would use span tags a lot when I would make e-commerce websites, and a product would go on sale, and I would have a class called on sale, right? And then all I would have to do is wrap a span tag around an item, and it would highlight, like the price in red, or something like that. And that way it would bring attention to the user. And they're kind of doing the same thing here. Notice that highlight, very important, would be red and bold, right? And it would stand out from the rest of the text. So a div is a generic block level element. A span is a generic inline element, and they're both very useful, in a lot of different circumstances, right? Especially when you're trying to do very specific things. The other thing that I tell people is that when you start to create a whole library of your own little CSS styles, which people do, you can copy those styles to other pages, and then you can throw in your span tags or your div tags, and your styles are already pre-built, and you just apply them to your document. You can read up on the span tag here at W3 Schools. I think I'm going to kind of skip over it. The little chart here, I think, is kind of helpful too. So div tags we generally use for large sections of content or grouping stuff together. It always starts on a new line because it's a block level element, takes up the full width of the container unless you declare otherwise. And it's used for layouts, little cards, headers, sections. But I would caution you, if you're really doing a header or a section or a nav or a footer or something like that, use the semantic tags instead. That would still be my recommendation. There are some designers, and they're mostly old guys like me, basically, that are stuck going div ID header, and it still works. So that's not a problem, right? But the modern approach with HTML5 is to use semantic tags. The inline ones, the span tags, they style small pieces of content, typically, right? It stays on the same line. It takes up minimal width, common use, highlighting text, styling icons, applying specific colors to things inside of something else, typically. Here's a little guide on when to use it. When you need to create something structural or a section on your page, or if you need to put a border around an entire group of elements, like we were seeing. Or a span tag is when you want to style something very small without affecting the layout of the page. All right, so that's kind of the div and the span tags. And then this leads us into this concept of the box model. And this, I will tell you, is a really important piece of knowledge when it comes to building modern web pages. We haven't talked about this yet, but when we're working on web pages, there's all this code that we write, and I'm just going to kind of use my sample page as the example. And really what we're creating, we call this a document, right? An HTML document is what we're creating. And then of course we have our style sheet that controls it, but there's this hierarchy that they call the document object model. We will talk about that as we move into the future. And that's an acronym that we boil down to 3 letters called DOM, or the DOM. So if you ever hear a web designer talk about the DOM, what they're talking about is the structural elements of the page, right? The fact that we have a doc type, HTML tag that holds everything. We have a head section, a body section, right? Head is non-visible part of the page, body is the visible part of the page. And then inside there, we have structural elements. And when we talk about the DOM, we talk about that structure and its hierarchy, basically. So for example, this H1 is a child element of header, which is a child element of body, which is a child element of HTML, right? And HTML is a child element of the document itself. And that's a structure. So the DOM, it becomes really important because we're dealing with all the layers of the structure as objects. And those objects can therefore be controlled. This is why CSS works with CSS styling elements. Or when we learn how to code with JavaScript, we can control the document object model with JavaScript as well. You know, and that becomes a pretty fundamental concept. Now, one aspect, right, of the box model is understanding first that we have block level content and inline content. And let's take a look here at the W3 Schools content on this, because this becomes really important. You know, if you want to like highlight this page or whatever, or give it double asterisks or something for being important, I would say this is one of the more important concepts about learning how to work, especially with CSS. And what we're looking at on the screen right now is the essence of the box model. So every object that we put on the screen, it does not matter if it is inline or block, but I will tell you that most people that think about the box model think about it typically on the block level first. And I do that in my own brain, right? That's how I kind of figured this out myself. But basically anything that you put on the screen, any content you put on the screen, exists inside this structure. So in other words, this could be letters, right? Or it could be an image, or it could be just an empty container, or it could be a form, or it could be a table, or a video, or whatever, right? Any content you can put on the page exists inside this center box. Then wrapped around it in this order from inside to outside is the padding. And we kind of have tinkered with this a little bit. And you can apply a border outside the padding, and outside the border, you can apply a margin. And I want you to notice that each one of those layers, right, if you want to think of it like that, the padding exists on all 4 sides of the content, as does the border, as does the margin. And they're always applied in that sequence. The padding's inside the border next to the content, the margins outside the border, of the object, right? But still, when you measure in the margin, the border, the padding, and the content, it is all one object. So every time I put something on the screen, whether you see any of these things or not, we can control every one of these. So if I put a paragraph on the screen and I want padding on it, or if I put an image on the screen and I want a border around it, or some space outside of it, I can control those. And not only can I control each one of those individually for every object or tag on the screen, block level or inline, I can also control each side of each one of those separately. So this gets kind of deep here pretty quickly, but demonstration will help you understand. Basically, for example, if I put a content object on the screen, I'm a really big fan of using padding. And in fact, I don't know if you guys remember this, when I did this box here, I did add padding to it. So I had my header, right, with my logo and my H1, H2, H3. And then if I look at my style sheet, right, and right here in the header, I added a padding of 35 pixels. And what that does, right? So let's look at the box model really quick, right? Is here's my content, whatever that content is. The padding adds space in between the content and the edge of the object, right? In all four directions. And when I use just a generic command like the one I have here, this will add it to all four sides, the top, the right, the bottom, and the left. And I'm kind of leading you somewhere with that, right? With saying those. And this is kind of really goofy because we'll get into this here in a second when we start to code. But there's the top, the bottom, or the right, bottom, and left. Yeah, I forgot a space here. I don't know if I can insert it. Yeah, I sure can. But that leads me to an acronym that's really easy to remember. And you know how I remember that? Trouble, right? Top, right, bottom, left. Because this becomes important in terms of how you apply style. So this is something you might want to kind of jot down. I can issue commands for margin. Let me get rid of that. So margin, border, and padding either collectively with one command. And so, for example, if I do 35 pixels of padding, that 35 pixels is added to each side. Or I can individually declare, for example, padding top, padding right, padding bottom, padding left, right? Either expressly by name or as a sequence of numbers provided in that order. And that's where my little trouble acronym comes in. It's pretty fascinating when you start to think about that. And it's like, oh, so if I put a border on something, I don't have to put it on all four sides. Then you start to think of like creative ways to use that. And there are some really creative ways to use this stuff. But when you start to understand that all the content that we sit on the screen fits inside a box like that, it gives you a bunch of different possibilities as to what you can do. And they have a little example here. So I'm going to do my little highlighter thing here. And of course it went away as soon as I turned that off, right? Okay, let's try that again. All right, so I have to leave that on. I just want the toolbar, I guess, a little bit out of my way. But notice here what they've put together. They have an H2, which is this text here, and then a couple of paragraphs that we see there. Then here's our generic div. This one doesn't have a class or an ID. I can still style all divs if you wish the same. But what they did with this div is they applied these styles. So a background color of light gray, a width of 300 pixels. It does not fill the whole container, right? A border, and we'll learn the syntax on this in just moments, but of 15 pixels width. So that's 15 pixels. It's a solid border. Not, in other words, it's not a dotted line or a dashed line or something like that. And a color, right? And there's a bunch of different values you can use here, a bunch of different values you can use here, right? Obviously, with colors, any color you can think of, you can make a border color. Then we're also applying padding, which is this space inside the object. And notice that space is consistent all the way around. And then there's also a margin of 20 pixels on the outside of the box in every direction. And that one we're not completely seeing because it doesn't have like a defined border, but it is there and it's pushing predominantly right now against the content of the paragraph above, right? So if I didn't have that margin there, to just give you an example here, I could remove the margin and run this and notice what happened. Now, it didn't really move up a lot, did it? Right? But it did shift over to the left. Now, watch what happens when I change the padding. If I go from 50 pixels down to 10, let's run that. Notice the difference. Now, I don't know if that's better. You might like this better. But one caution I would give you, like, why do we use padding? Padding is probably the one of the more important ones to use, is because when you don't, then your text starts to cram into your border, and you have to admit that's not as easy to read as having the padding there, and maybe having an ample amount of padding on top of it. That's actually a pretty comfortable amount. Also, since we're looking at border, that border is 15 pixels, and you might go, oh my God, that's a really thick border, right? Yes, it is. So what if you decided to just make it 5 pixels, and notice how that becomes much smaller? That's a little more palatable also. And maybe you are looking at and going, man, that green's a little too bright. Maybe a light green would be a little bit better, maybe not. You know, these are very subjective choices. You can also do things like create dashed lines, right? Notice, I don't know if you can see that. Maybe if I make this like red, right? You can see the dashed line, and there's dotted and a couple of other ones that you can use. I don't know if this is necessarily in good taste. I'm not claiming that it is, but you can control those things and really add a little bit more pizzazz to your page. So in other words, instead of just throwing text on the screen, now I can do stuff with it. I can make it look more like a professional website, really. When you start to get creative with this, and you start to, style your containers, right? And you start to place them on the screen, and you throw in a little typography, and then later on you learn different techniques for like responsive design. Things start really popping a lot more, right? And what helps a lot, right, and we're going to lead up to this as well, is having a vision of where you're going with it before you build it, right? Rather than just trying stuff on the fly with code. And that's basically what I'm doing right now, is I'm just experimenting with objects on the screen. And what I would encourage you to do as I get into coding here is do exactly the same thing. So let's go back and just kind of hit that topic a little bit more. They have a couple of examples here, and they will start to talk about the fact that you can control the width and the height of an element, and that becomes pretty important to understand how to control those things. And then they start to do these calculations. So why don't we build some stuff and then start applying some styles and see where it goes, right? Because we're getting to the point now where we should be coding rather than just talking about it. So let's start with a little bit of file management. And this is like, my big push every time, right? Like, get things, saved, create replicants of your work each week. And we're going into unit 6. And I think, if most of you are following this pattern, which is a good pattern, I'm going to start unit 6 work. So I'm going to copy unit 5, assuming everything inside there is the way I want it and it's all good, right? And if it's not, you got to start fixing it, is kind of the point. And then paste it back in. And then I'm going to right click and rename, and we're just going to call it unit 6. And I'm sticking with my all lowercase, no spaces in my file and folder names, right? Because that works better on servers. And then we can go into the folder, and here are all my files, including my images and a bunch of other stuff. All right, let's now bring up our coding engines. I'm going to bring up Visual Studio Code. I may also start experimenting a little bit here. And you can see I have my stuff from my AI class in here from last night. I need to open the correct folder here. So I'm going to find that folder in my file system. You see how this stuff becomes pretty routine because we do it every week and every time we start working. So this is the folder where I'm going to be working this week. I'm just selecting that folder. It should load up all my pages. Turn off the chat agent there and close the welcome page. Let's just do a really quick review before we start coding anything. And this is something I always encourage you to do as well. Let's set our web page back to 100% zoom. I'm doing that by holding down the control key and pressing 0, by the way. Most browsers will do that. The other way to do it is to come here and change the zoom level back to 100%. right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm just kind of like looking around my site here. Um, all right. Yeah, granted, I've been experimenting. I haven't really been worried about making it look particularly good, right? And we're still kind of in that mode, frankly. But as we kind of cross midterm, we're going to start really focusing on trying to make it look really, really nice, right? That's going to be a goal that we're going to make. In fact, we might get some of that done tonight. So here's my contact page, pretty basic. I also have an about page where I have a table and another image. Just remember, we were playing with like images being skewed and adjusted and everything. Now, what I'm thinking here is in my code, and I'm going to open up all my code files. So I got my index page, my contact page, and my about page all open. And I want to refresh your memory that all of them have the exact same semantic structure, right? So basically what that means is like from here on up, all the pages are basically the same. And at the bottom, pretty much, from the footer, from here on down, they're all the same too, right? And that helps to create that consistent look and feel. So one really impactful thing that you can do, and we're gonna experiment with a lot of different things here tonight, is to play with this a little bit. I am going to create another page. I'm not really sure what I'm going to put on it yet. I'll think about that. I guess I could make a gallery page or maybe a standings page. I don't know if any of that makes sense, or a players page or something like that. But I'm going to create another page where I can just like throw stuff on there and just goof around with it. The other thing that you could do, and this is always a suggestion to give to my students too, is you can just create one page that's part of your site that's just for experimenting, right? And you know what? Why don't I just do that? So I'm gonna, okay, the about page is pretty basic. There's not a lot of stuff on here to delete. So I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna right click and copy it. And then I'm gonna right click and paste. And then I'm gonna rename it, right? And this is my experiment page. I'm gonna just call it code. or how about this, code test? That's probably a good name, right? And notice that's not a space in there, that's a dash. So I did that on purpose. And then because this is a different page, right, all the stuff that's in the main section, the stuff that changes on the page, I'm just going to delete it. And for now, I'm just going to put in a paragraph here that says, this is my code test page. Just so when I land on it, I know what it is. All right, I added a page. Now here's the other thing you should do, is you should follow the format that you're using here and create a link to it and add it to every other page, right? So I'm going to create an href, and this, we'll call this code test HTML. It's going to be in the same folder, and I'll just call it code. That's probably adequate. And then this and that little pipe symbol from the previous line, I'm going to copy that and add it to the nav section of all of my pages. And here's the why. Because that way, when I go from page to page to page, I can go to any other page directly. I didn't forget about it. You know what I mean? It's like, wait, no, you got to go to the contact page, go to the code page. That's not good, right? That navigation should be consistent. Now I have changed all the pages, so they all need to be saved. So I'm doing a save all, right? That's a slick trick too, by the way. Let's take a look in the browser, just make sure. Refresh. Oh, I'm looking at it on Prometheus. I'm not looking at it locally, so that's not good. So I'm going to look at it from the local view here. This is on my computer, actually on my Google Drive, but there's my code page. But here's home, contact, about, and code. And I think we're kind of starting to, build a site here, right? And you can see the consistency, right? And I think this is really kind of cool. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I do want to containerize the site, and this is kind of an interesting approach. So I'm going to demonstrate the use of a div tag, um, and to take the site contents, like we were looking at the BBC News site, and I pointed out, you notice how the content doesn't go all the way to the edge? That's kind of on purpose. I'm going to do the same thing with my site. I'm going to narrow up all the contents of the page. So this can be done a number of different ways, by the way. Some people would look at it and go, oh, you could just put padding on the body and that would narrow it up. Yeah, that would work. I don't think that's the best approach though. Here's what I'm going to do. And once again, this is going to involve editing all my pages, but I'm going to experiment first with my index page. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to add a div right here, just inside the body tag. I'm going to add an ID to that div, and different people will call this different things. So, okay, it gave me a closing tag here. So I'm going to take that closing tag and I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to move it all the way to the bottom, just inside the closing body tag. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight all this here, and then I'm going to right click and format selection. And I just want to show you that everything on my page, including all the semantic structure, is nested inside that div. So there's the closer, there's the opener. Now, people will call this type of a div by different names. A really common titling for it, and I'm surprised they didn't make a semantic tag for this, is wrapper. Some people call it wrapper, and not the kind that are lyrical, by the way. Right. Or some people will call it container, whatever. It doesn't matter what you call it. I'll go with wrapper because that's what I typically do. But you can call it anything you want. You could call it chopped liver, or you could call it, Green Bay Packer container with an excessively long name by choice. Really, you can name it that verbosely. All right, then this structure, for right now, I'm just going to experiment on my index page, but if it works for me, I'm going to copy that same div structure to all the other pages. And let's take a look at what this is going to do here. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go back to the browser, go to the home page, and you will notice if I right click and view source, it is there, right? Yeah, it's there, right? But the effect of it right now is nothing. But from a coding standpoint, all the content basically on the page from the top to the bottom is encapsulated inside that container. And probably one of the first most impactful things that we can do with it is to narrow up the content. So let's go into the style sheet, which I don't have open yet. So I'm going to open that up. And because this is a tag that appears near the top of the document, I'm going to put it, well, where did I put it in my HTML? I put it just below the body. So that's where I'm going to put it in my CSS. Why? Because it's easier for me to find it that way. And I could apply styles to just the div, but that's not really a good idea, because if I have other divs on the page, those will also have the same style. It is better to attach to the ID that I created called wrapper. So I'm going to do # wrapper, then do my opening and closing curly brackets, and then my styles will go here. First thing I'll do is I'm just going to adjust the width. Now, widths can be declared in a number of different ways. Probably the two primary ways to declare the widths on a screen is either using pixels, right? So, and a pixel would be a hard-coded count of how many little pixels on the screen. And remember, like an HD screen, like the one that we're looking at right now, is 1920 pixels across and 1080 pixels tall. And you might have an even bigger one at home, right? But remember, your phone doesn't have that, and your tablet doesn't have that, and depending on which way you're holding it, right? Some phones do, but it's pretty rare, actually. So a common way to do this is actually, instead of declaring pixels, we could declare a percentage of the width. Well, this is kind of interesting. So what if I set the width to be 80% Now think about this. The wrapper sits inside the body. The body does not have a declared width, so that occupies 100% of the screen width that's allowed to it. Now the wrapper is going to occupy 80% of the body. All right. I'm going to go ahead and save the style sheet. Notice it's not saved. So Control S to save, and then back to the browser, and let's watch what happens to the screen here. So here's a Control R to refresh, and it became 80% of the screen width. Now, I look at the BBC and I go, yeah, but theirs is not left justified. Theirs is in the center, right? And the center is what we're kind of used to seeing. So you can also control that. So real basic here. One approach might be, I'm just putting it out there. Some people go, well, I can go text align center, but hold on a second. This is not text, right? Because that's a centering technique that we've learned. So we got to backtrack here. So one way to center stuff, and this is really kind of a bizarre trick, is to set the right margin to 0 and the left margin to 0. And then it will automatically center your content. So the technique is basically like this: margin left 0, and then margin dash right 0. Now, this is kind of interesting because I'm not saying pixels, I'm not saying percent. Something that's set to nothing doesn't matter if it's a pixel or percent. That's why people don't put anything after a 0 often. I'm going to save this. And I'm going to show you the effect. So let's take a look at what happens to the page. Here's the refresh. Well, it didn't move, did it? Right. So one technique that people use to kind of fix this is they do this: margin 0 auto. Type the right letters here. Save it. Let's go refresh. And there it is centered. So this is a really helpful trick. Now, we're not really adding a margin here, but we're telling it kind of symbolically there shouldn't be any margin on the left or the right. So then what happens is the content's not all the way wide. So then it fights itself, not fight, it lays itself out by putting it in the middle. Now you might go, wow, that is better, right? Because like most web pages don't go all the way across the screen. And I picked an arbitrary number of 80%. It doesn't have to be 80%. You can experiment with that number. So for example, I might set this to, I don't know, 65%. Let's just do that really quick. And I saved it and I refreshed, and it's even narrower. Now, notice what happens to the text. The text does become easier to read just because it's narrowed. Here's another really cool thing that you can do with this, right? And I think this is really pretty impactful as well. And yeah, I hate my typography up here, so we got to do something about that as we go forward. The other thing that you can do, and we've been playing with some of these features here, is we can look at adding a border to the box and following the techniques that we learned. There's we can control all the borders separately, by the way, but I'm going to do a collective border, and I'm going to pick an arbitrary amount, like maybe 3 pixels. That's kind of small. I prefer a solid line, and let's just make it something kind of dark, like maybe, I don't know, dark gray or something like that. That's not very dark though. How about a dark something? Let's go with that. And of course you can pick whatever color you want. All right, saving, refreshing. So there's a border. Okay. All right, it did give it some definition. Like I can tell that it's containerized now. And frankly, you might look at this and go, oh my God, that's horrible. That's fine. You're not hurting my feelings. I think it's horrible too. Right. But the point is to show you the technique, right? And the fact that you can control that. You can make it really subtle. You can make it really pronounced. You don't have to have a border at all. But I put the border in kind of for the same reason we put the borders around the table, just to see where the stuff sits. Right? It helps you to see it on the screen. And now, as I look at it, I go, oh my God, well, I have a border, I have a margin of 0 left and right automatically centering me. But man, those words are touching the edge of the box, which you told me before isn't a good thing, right? So let's add some padding to the box also. Now this one you have to be kind of careful with, and I'll show you why. So I'm going to put in a padding command, and let's just do 20 pixels. You can make that more or less. Saving it back to the browser and refreshing. And now when I look at the content, I'm like, okay, that's better a little bit, right? It might still be too close, but now the words aren't touching, and that little bit of visual space really helps the readability. I would argue it should be significantly more for text, but oh my God, well, now I don't like the header. You guys feeling that, right? It's like, oh, I don't know if I like the padding around the header. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I'm not digging it. So if you want to like containerize your content, you can do that. And I think that's more useful for the stuff in the center of the page. But when I look at a site that's already designed and I go like look at this BBC website, I'm like, well, yeah, well, it's containerized, but it seems like the top navigation goes all the way across. This stuff's all containerized, but this stuff goes all the way across. So how would I fix that? Right? So here's an idea. And you don't have to follow this idea, by the way, because you might like that look. I don't know. So my wrapper right now starts here and includes the header and the nav, so they're subject to those styles. But if I decided that's not where I want that, I might take that div, the opening div, and I might put it here instead. So just the main content area and everything below is containerized. So let's take a look at that and see if we like that better. We may or we may not. And you know, this is the fun part of web design, folks. It's very subjective. All right. Well, I kind of broke it a little bit, right? All right. Well, let's go take a look at the code. That was not the effect that was. Oh, you see what it did? I dropped the div tag here and it dropped a closer there. So I got to get rid of that because I still have a closer down here at the bottom. And that actually brings up a really good point. I used to do this a lot when I used a lot of divs, is I would put in what we call an HTML comment, and we haven't talked about these yet, but an HTML comment is formed by typing these characters. It's basically I'll zoom in if that's helpful. It's basically an exclamation point and 2 dashes, and then closes with 2 dashes and a closing bracket. And then inside here, you can type whatever words you want, and it doesn't end up on your page. But what I used to do a lot is when I would have a bunch of divs on a page, and after a while, I'm like, I don't know which div is closing which thing, right? I would just put in a little thing here. It says close wrapper. And then I know that this one goes with the wrapper above. That was my technique. Right. And this is optional, mind you. But the fact that it dropped one in up here was not good. But I'm going to save it. And I think now I have more of the effect that I want. So here's the refresh. So now my header, and granted, this is not the most beautiful thing yet, header, right? But notice how my navigation and my header logo thing, whatever, those are full screen and my content is narrowed up. And I don't think that's a bad look. I think it's kind of all right. I'm not sure I like the border, but whatever. I could also, and I'm just kind of throwing a bunch of little styling things in all at once here. I could put a background color or image on this, or maybe the body can have a different one. Like the body could have like grass, and the middle box could have like a cool Packer color, right? And so let's just throw in a color just for the sake of seeing it, right? I'm not saying this is a good choice. I'm just proof of concept. But you notice how that creates definition and separation of the content, right? Once again, I'm not sure I like this, but it's a one step at a time thing. If you like your header and nav going all the way across the screen, which I tend to, I like that, right? My footer, however, is inside the container. I could put that outside of the container too, if I wished. But I think this technique of narrowing up your content is a smart one. Here's the problem with it, though, and we'll learn to address this eventually. I've already taught you that if you want to simulate what your stuff looks like on a phone, take your browser window and just narrow it up. All right, take a look at what's happening to my content, right? Header looks fine. And now this is narrowed up. And when I look at it, I go, oh, that's we're like, wait, like if this is my phone, I'm kind of wasting a lot of screen space, right? Yeah. So I might like if I was doing more advanced design, maybe 65% isn't good, maybe more like 75% is better, and or let's go back to 80, something like that. Save it, refresh it, a little better, right? But ultimately, we will learn is you can apply different CSS to different screen widths with a tool called media queries. And we're working our way up to this, because it's kind of an advanced skill. But that does look a little bit better. So let's just keep working with this. But you know what? I'm also looking at the clock here. We're due for a 5-minute break. So let's take a 5-minute break, folks. All right. So I'm going to pause the video here and all right, I'm going to get rolling here, folks. Again, we're coming back from break, and I realize some of you might not be back on screen yet, but hey, that's how it goes sometimes. But kind of going back to this issue here, and I do kind of like some of the things, and I look at all this design stuff that I'm thinking about right now, and as I was kind of on break here and I was looking at my screen, I'm like, okay, I think I know how I'm going to fix my header now. And I think I'm going to use that grass that I have up there as maybe the body background instead of the header background. And I'm going to get rid of some of the stuff in the header and just make it a little bit more streamlined. And I'm going to show you like all these techniques to kind of reinforce some of the stuff that we're learning. So let's handle a different issue though, really quick, because it was kind of bugging me when I was on break. Because I noticed, all right, I have this image here that's on the screen and it kind of looks okay. And then we get to this point where, oh, wait a second. Now it starts to break a little bit. And I don't know if you guys are picking up on that as my screen repositions, right? And I realize that like in Zoom, sometimes the smooth adjustment doesn't really come through. But when I get past a certain point, the image starts to spill over. That's not good. That's not a professional look. Right? That looks very amateurish. And is there a way to fix that? And the answer to that is absolutely there's a way to fix that. So let's go to the index page where the image resides. And it resides right here. And you'll notice that I have an image. And yes, I could apply styles directly to the image tag, but I don't want to apply it to all the images. I just want to apply it to this particular one. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give this image an ID, right? Because that you use only once on a page, remember? And I don't know, let's just call it Packer headline. Lack of a better title. All right. Save that index file. Then I'm going to copy this, of course, and then I'm going to add a style to my style sheet. And this is a very simple thing to do, by the way, and therefore I encourage it. And you notice I'm kind of looking for a good spot to put it. Maybe here's good. So I'm going to put it down there. And this is an ID, so I want to start it with a pound sign, right, or the hash mark, if you will. And then set of curly brackets, split them. And I'm going to just use a couple really, a couple little basic tricks here. And Rachel, the answer to that question for me, typically, yes, I prefer a dash over an underscore, right? Some people like underscores better. And really it doesn't have to be that. Other people, they will do like what they call camel casing, where they do the logical words start with a capital letter. This has always been my convention, and that's a really actually good question. I know what my conventions are and I always follow them. So I don't guess as much as, what did I name that? I forgot, so that's kind of why I do it. But if I take that particular image, I can set the width of that, mind you, to 100%. Okay, 100% of what? The container that's holding it. That would make more sense because it's sitting inside that box. All right, so the other aspect of it is how wide is that image natively? And so if I do, and I'm gonna stay away from the inspect tool right now, but we will learn about that pretty soon too. If I look at that image here and just hover over it, it's 686 pixels wide. So I'm not just going to add a style to make it 100% of the width, because then it'll stretch it if I get really wide. But I'm also going to set another setting called max width of the actual pixel amount that it was. And I think it was 686 pixels. So it'll get no bigger than what it really is. And then, oh, why is that underlining red? I forgot the semicolon here, folks. Right. Let's save that. Let's go back to the page and refresh just right where it is. And notice now how it fits really nicely. When I make it bigger, it stays its native size. It'd probably be better centered, you might argue, right? But when I go smaller, isn't that slick, right? That's much better, right? So that's a setting I might recommend, like if you have images that want to behave that way. Now, if I want to center this one, I can use the same technique I used before, which is I can use the margin zero auto thing right inside here. So I can just say margin colon 0 auto. Saving it back to the browser and refreshing. And wait a second, it didn't center. Correct? Yeah. Here's the why. This is a inline element. So the margin 0 auto won't center an inline element because the element is not filling the container. That's the why. So because it's an inline element, to center this one, this is really kind of a weird thing, right? That doesn't work. I can use text align center here because text align works on inline elements as opposed to block level elements. If I wanted to turn it into a block level element, one trick I could use, and I'm just throwing this out there, is I could put this inside of its own div. That's one way to do it. But I'm choosing to do it this way. This will work too. So watch the result. Oh, it's still not working. Okay. Maybe I'll control shift that. One of the reasons for that, I think, is because I don't have a containerize it and then center the parent container, which has a width of 686. So I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Let's just be happy that it resizes for right now. Let's just do that. Okay. All right. And I feel bad about that. So I feel like I have to fix it. So let's do this. All right. I'll put a div around it. I'm going down the rabbit hole here, but this is what happens when you do web stuff, right? Opening and closing div, but I'm going to take the closing div. I'm going to wrap it around the image, right? I am going to format that selection there. Okay. And then let's call this, well, we could put a class on this, I suppose. Let's call it center image. That's a good name. So I'm going to copy that. Let's go to the style sheet. Let's save the HTML file. Go to the style sheet. I'll put it right next to the headline here, kind of in the order it appears. This is a class. So we start with a dot. We'll put curly brackets in there. We will give it a, let's just try the margin 0 auto trick, because I think that alone will work. Saving it. Let's refresh. That's not working either. What if I say width a combination of techniques here, folks, that are applied to this. And I think if I say 686, now let's try it. There we go. Okay, so now it's centering, but now I have a concern that when I do this, it breaks again, right? So, all right, so like you see like the kind of stuff, and I feel for you guys when you first do this, you don't get how it works. And you can see even when you do know how it works, I think this is the fix. So let me just try that really quick. Refreshing. Okay, there we go. All right, so that's kind of a combination of techniques, and I'll just hang on that screen there for the screenshotters, right? And you think about the logic here, right? There's the regular width is this, but I'm not going to let it get bigger than the container that's holding it. Where with this one, I'm setting it to the size of the container, and I'm not letting it get bigger than its native size. And you see how the two styles fight each other. So this is kind of it's a logical leap, basically. But the result, right, is an image that scales and adjusts, and I think that's pretty cool. And when I go full screen, it sits in the middle. So you may or may not like that. All right, let's play a little bit with some more of these settings. I'm going to kind of hit the lecture materials as I'm kind of scrolling through this, because we talked about the content, the padding, the border, and the margin relative to the box model. And I think you guys are starting to see some of this stuff. But I do want to point out that those things can be individually controlled. We've already been playing with the width and the height, and we're going to also apply this style thing. But I do want to talk about how the box model can break down to allow the individual control of the object on multiple sides. So right now, as I look at my page, here's the thing I noticed. This box at the top is touching my nav, and I'm not sure I like it. Kind of a personal choice once again. If I want to increase the space at the top, I can do that once again on the wrapper, and I have a margin 0 auto, but I can also apply to the nav a margin dash bottom. And I want you to notice that, like, as I hit margin dash, and this is true for all of the box model items, by the way, this works for padding, border, and margin. I can control the top, bottom, left, right, all individually. And you'll notice that there's other options as well. Those get a little more advanced. But the fact that I can control the margin just on the bottom, so I can take the navigation and put a margin at the bottom of it so the thing that follows it can't touch, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to say margin bottom, and I'll just pick an arbitrary amount. We'll just go with 20 pixels. That seems like a nice, safe little amount. And let's go take a look at the screen now. All right, so just pushed it down just a little bit. What some designers will also do, and we do call this a reset. And I will tell you, for right now, you guys might want to avoid doing this little trick. We've learned about CS selectors, right? So we've learned that we can apply to tags directly, that we can apply to classes, right, with a dot, that we can apply to IDs with a pound sign. And then I don't know if you guys remember this from last week, but there's also what we call the universal selector. And we're going to start to employ this, which is why I'm using it. So that means this will apply to every element. And with this one, you must be very, very cautious. I'm going to show you what it does. And then a lot of you immediately will throw it away because of what it does, right? But we consider this a reset. So in other words, some designers don't like the fact that the browser automatically controls margins. And I'm going to, I guess I should demonstrate this here in the browser, because you notice, like, I never put a padding inside the body, but there's a little bit of a padding there, right? The browser doesn't let the content touch the edge of the screen. So like if I want to make that grass touch the edge of the screen, I can do it by saying margin 0. And then also what people typically do is they say, actually it's padding 0 that does it. They'll say padding 0 and border 0, right? And these are really basic resets. There's actually like entire lists of things that you should reset, but these are the three basics. Um, so any object that has a margin, a border, or padding automatically built into it, this will apply to everything on the page and automatically strike it. So watch what happens on the page now. And watch like up here. All right, it did really change it. But it is, I kind of like it, right? There's some aspects of it I like, but then if you start to look at some other things, for example, paragraphs lost their margins, and block quote lost its margin, and my lists broke. And so when I do that universal reset, guess what? It can break a lot of stuff. So then you're going back in and you're rebuilding all your styles from scratch. So my caution is you can do this, but then you have to rebuild every object's style from scratch, which I don't recommend. So you can be selective with this. So let's remove that for now. But what I am going to do is on the body, I'm going to say margin 0 and padding 0 just on the body. Let's see if that gives me kind of the same effect without breaking everything else. So let's refresh. All right, a little better, right? Something, I'm not sure what happened to the header there, right? Like it fixed something, right? Because I had padding, I guess, on the header, right? So that came back. I still have my spacing here. And now my paragraphs and my lists look okay. But now I'm able to get that header and navigation to touch the edge of the screen, which I think is kind of okay. It's not the prettiest thing yet, but we're, once again, one step at a time on adjusting things. So I like where I'm going with it. So let's now take a look at this other aspect. Like if I have, for example, and let's go to a code page here. So I'm going to go to my code page and I'm going to play with this paragraph to demonstrate some of these other techniques, by the way. So I'm going to take this paragraph text and notice, yeah, this isn't good because this one's not in the container yet, right? It's going all the way to the edge of the screen and the default padding is removed. So it's like touching, oh, horrible. Let's fix it. So on all of my pages, since I want them to be consistent, I'm going to go ahead and take that wrapper tag and add it right below the nav on all of my pages. So let's go to contact. And then, of course, adding that there means I have to take this and move it to the bottom. And then I think I have to reselect this here to copy it again. So copy, and we go here. And once again, the point of this is be really consistent with what you're doing. And if your brain is telling you, couldn't we just make a template and copy that template? Yeah, you totally could. That's not what we have been doing here because we have active content. So I need to recopy that wrapper. And then this, once again, will go to the bottom. But notice, the point is consistency. And you should probably reformat your pages, by the way. But I'm going to do a save all for right now. And then let's go back to the browser just for a second, refresh. All right. So notice this is my code page now. Now it's in the container and I really didn't do anything to it. It's in the container. My about page is in the container. My contact page is in the container. My home page is in the container. And you see the consistency and how that's building, right? All right. But the point of this was to play with this paragraph. So inside the code test page, I'm going to take this paragraph and I really kind of what I need is a whole lot more text, real frankly. So I'm going to add a space here You can have more, you know, real text in there if you want, but this is for demonstration purposes. And what I'm doing is, and you guys are like, oh, hey, hey, I don't know if you're picking up on this, but I'm pasting it like a million times. And yeah, I can turn on word wrap so it comes in like this, but it's one paragraph. And because I'm experimenting, I'm going to call it class. Let's call it, you know, box model example, right? And this is just to experiment with it. And you can come up with more meaningful names. It doesn't really matter what you name it, but that's what I'm naming it. All right, so I'm going to take that. I'm going to save this page. I'm going to copy that little snippet of text, go to my style sheet. I'm going to go way to the bottom this time. And this is a class, so I'm going to do the dot in front of it. And now I'm going to start playing with it. Okay, so let's play once again with border. And with border, I just want to point out the fact that border, usually when you use this command, will have the three little aspects of it, which would be how thick the line is, right? And then usually we express that in pixels. So let's say 22 pixels, right? Whether it's a solid line, right? And it's not coming up quite the way I want it to. So let's do this. They have a separate command called border style, right? And I'm just going to type through, and the reason I'm doing this is to show you the options. So those are all your options there. So you can have a dash, dotted, double, groove, hidden, outset, inset, ridge, unset, and all of these do have a different look to them. The one that I typically use the most is, you know, solid, right? And that's implied if you don't declare it. The other thing, did you guys notice that when I hit the dash after border, that it once again brings up the top, the right, the bottom, and somewhere is the left? Yeah, you can control all those pieces. And if you start scrolling through here, you notice how much more you can control. It's kind of crazy, actually, the amount of granular control you can have of it. You can have even have images as borders. You can get way deep on this, by the way. But what I typically tell people is the basic approach of just saying border, a width, a type of line. In this case, I'm just going to use solid, and then a color, and you know, pick whatever color you want. And I think I'm just going to do a hash mark, pick something, and then just use the color selector to change it to something else. That basic approach works really well. Let's just take a look at the result really quick. And I want you to notice, because this container is inside the other container, there it is, right? Now, once again, maybe not the prettiest thing, but I'm going to also kind of demonstrate something kind of interesting as well. You can selectively apply this to one side of the container. So if I want a big red border at the top and no borders on the rest, I can do that. Or if I want it on the left, but not the right or nowhere else, I can do that. And you can get really creative with this, you know, and I think it's fascinating. I've seen some people do some super cool designs doing stuff like this, you know, where they're putting the border on the left. All right, well, that doesn't look good because it's kind of touching, but what if I also put padding, and notice padding left, so a little space on the left side of the box, maybe 30 pixels, and then I get this look, you know. And I'm not saying that this looks good, but I'm just giving you ideas like what you could possibly do. You can do all sorts of crazy things with this. So experiment to your heart's content. If applying the borders separately per side is kind of problematic for you, don't worry about that. Right? I've seen some really clever techniques of people doing that, but usually when we do borders, we wrap it all the way around an object typically. So let's just do that for now and refresh. Okay, so there's our object. The other thing I'm going to do is that is mighty wide, so I'm going to set my width to, let's just make it 50%, just to have something to narrow up a little bit, saving, refreshing. Okay. Now, right now I have a padding on the left, but I don't have one on the top, the right, or the bottom. So I want to show you, like, one technique would be if I wanted padding, let's say padding on the top, I can declare that separately and say 50 pixels. And if I want, I can also say padding right, padding bottom, control each one separately with 4 separate statements. And just to show you that it works, it does work. But then we can use that trouble technique. You guys remember what I was talking about? Top, right, bottom, left. And we can declare one singular padding command and then declare 4 values. So the first value is the top. The second value is the right. The third value is the bottom, and I'll make that one maybe, I don't know, 80 pixels. And then the last one would be the left, and I'll make that just 10 pixels, right? So top, right, bottom, left, in that order, right? That ordering also works with borders. It also works with margin, by the way. Right. Let's refresh, right? Top, right, bottom, left, all have different margins. And I don't know if like you have like a vision for like what you might do with that, but like if you're putting a page up there and like, oh, it would be nice if that was moved over a little bit, you can kind of do that stuff. That's the point of it. Right, so play with that technique. I'm not saying this is pretty, but it can totally be done. Right. You can also add your margins in there, etc. We can put a background on this, a background image on it, control the spacing. Now, here's something that weird that happens with working with the box model, though. And they do start to talk about it as they're kind of defining this. You have to start, like if you're working inside of a container that has a fixed amount of space, you got to start counting up your pixels. Because if I only have 500 pixels to work with, and then I have like margins and padding, that all adds to the width of the object, right? And this is where it gets really strange. So if I add, for example, if I have a border that's 30 pixels wide and a margin that's 30 pixels wide and padding that's 30 pixels wide, if I have an object where I've declared the width to be, let's say, 200 pixels, right? And I should use really basic numbers here, but let's say this is 100 pixels across. If my padding is 30, well, I'm adding 30 to each side, so now it's 160. And then my border is another 30, I'm adding another 60 to it. So now I'm at like 300 or 220. And you see where I'm going with that, right? Now you're messing with it. So like you think you're occupying X number of pixels and you're not. So they have this styling command called the box sizing property. And what the kind of the point of this is, and there's 2 approaches to do this, right? The default, like when we use width on an object, it's called a content box. We don't declare this, but there is a style that you can apply called that, right? So when I put a width on an object, we're really using the first technique. However, the size of that object does not accommodate for the padding. So right now, as I look at this, right, right now I'm using 50%. Let's set it for a hard-coded amount, like 300 pixels. Right. And for right now, I will remove the padding. Right, so let's just save this, look at the page, and refresh. So this is what I've created. It's 300 pixels across. There's no padding inside of it. If I add padding, and I'm just gonna do a padding that goes all the way around, by the way. And I add, let's say, 30 pixels. And I did caps there. That's not good, by the way. It still worked, but it's not considered good. Semicolon. Saving. Watch the object. It will grow in size. It is no longer 300 pixels across. In actuality, it's 300 plus 30 on both sides. So it's 360 plus 3 pixels for the border on each side. So 366 pixels is the actual size of the object. If I apply this command that they're referring to, or I'm referring to actually in my lecture notes, the border box property, and basically what we do is we add this box sizing border box. All right. Now I'm going to apply that with a universal selector so you can see that it's actually a good thing to add to your page. So here's a good use for the universal selector. And the syntax is box sizing border box. Box sizing, and notice border box is the default thing. And what this will do, and I want you to watch the page as I refresh it. It went back to 300 pixels. Regardless of what my borders are and what my padding is, it's 300 pixels. So most designers prefer to do this because then they don't have to do the math. And that's kind of the point of what they were doing here is they started like adding up, well, if you're doing that and you're adding padding and you're adding a border and really this is how big it is, right? And then they push you to use a border box, which is a better idea because then the box is always that size. And I think that's pretty important. So this is a universal selector I do recommend. That's a really good use of it. So anytime you put a width on an object with pixels, it's exactly that size, regardless of your padding. So I think that's really helpful for doing good layouts. They do talk here about how you do padding, border, and margin, and I think we've been playing with that enough now that I don't need to review all of these. But if you want to dig into one of these and experiment, please do, right? And W3 has great content on this. Another thing that I think is really important to discuss here is what we call collapsing margins. So, and this is kind of an interesting effect, right? And this is one that drives designers crazy, by the way, is the fact that they don't know this little feature, right? So it says, imagine you have two paragraphs. Paragraph 1 has a margin bottom of 20, and paragraph 2 has a margin top of 30. So in principle, you think you got 50 pixels of space between the two objects, but that's not how margin works. The margins will basically already collapse, and it will choose the larger of the two values and just use that one. And this is the thing that a lot of designers don't know. And they're like, oh my God, I don't understand why it's not moving. I just added 50 pixels of margin. And then sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And it depends on which one's bigger, right? So this is the fair warning one. So if I apply a margin to one object at the bottom and a margin to the other object at the top, and they're touching each other, the one with the bigger margin takes over. So this is something you can leverage, but it's also something that can drive you completely crazy, right? And you're like, I don't get it, you know, and I've been there, right? And sometimes I forget it myself that that's really kind of a thing. Now, I will be tweaking my design a little bit more, but I do want to kind of get to these other topics because we're starting to run out of time. When you start to design a website, you know, and one of our assignments here in this unit is to do your site design. So like you need to pick which one of your projects you're building, describe it, and then give me a wireframe. And a wireframe is something I'm going to demonstrate to you, but wireframing is basically a technique for coming up with a really rough design for a website so I can show either myself or a client potentially like what kind of layout I want to use. And what I am going to do is I'm going to use the annotation tools here to kind of really do a fast, primitive wireframe for a site. So for example, I might go, okay, well, let's just say this is my browser window. Inside that browser window, and I'm kind of mimicking the design I have right now, I'm going to have a header, right? And right here, I'm going to have that's going to be the logo. And then right here is going to be the Green Bay Packer text. In fact, I probably wouldn't draw it as a box. I'd probably, type, Packers or something, right? So you can put words in. And then I might say, well, I'm going to have a nav right here, and that's going to have a bunch of little entries, right? This is my nav. This is very primitive, mind you. And then I think I'm going to have one column of information here, and then I'm going to have a photo, and then I'm going to have this like sidebar, and then I'll have maybe like a social media link or some images. And then down here, I'll have the standings, and over here, I'll have my footer, and I'm doing this super fast, right? But think about like what a web page looks like and what design would work well for users. And I'm using kind of a very common one right here, right? Where we have a header, a nav, content, maybe put into columns, maybe not. That's very subjective. And then a footer and whatever. And then the other thing is I might have like some pages on my website. So I'll just use the BBC News site here as an example, where this is, their homepage. I'm just going to refresh here, right? And you can see they kind of have some structure here. They have some articles are featured, some are in columns. But then if I take one of these stories and click on it, then I get to the content page, and you notice how the content page is broken down. This looks different than the homepage, right? And your site might be the same way. So your homepage might have like, well, I've got like 4 major areas I want to push people to. So I might have 4 boxes at the top or 4 links at the top. And then I might have an image and some text. But when I get to that page, the page might look a little bit different. And this is like a regular article page on their site. And that's got a much different wireframe, right? Did you guys notice how narrow this is? Yeah, it's really narrow because the BBC knows, hey, heck, their paragraphs are only 1 sentence long, a lot of space between them, but really narrow and really easy to read. Right. So it depends on the kind of content you're doing. If you have a lot of images, maybe you have an image gallery, it might make sense to fill the whole screen, right, with a bunch of boxes. If you have words and images, you might have a column of words and a column of images. Or maybe there's a video and then some text and then some images and columns. The design ideas are yours. What I really like a lot in one of the PowerPoints that we have here, and I think it's this one, is they start to talk about, yeah, this isn't the one, sorry. Let's go to the next one. They start to talk about some basic wireframing, and I'm showing you this because I think this is a lot easier than me trying to draw it out. But you notice how this is a very, very, very primitive overview of the structure of the site. And right now, the way that we're building a website, we're kind of following this approach. Notice there's a wrapper and then a header and a nav. I decided to move my header and nav outside the wrapper, if you remember, to go full screen. But this is a really common layout. Why? Because this one works great on every device. Doesn't matter how wide it is, how tall it is, or anything like that, right? So that's not a bad one to apply to a design. Here's one where the navigation's on the left. The header goes full screen, the footer goes full screen. Then they have some examples like, okay, so if you wanted to do a 2-column layout, they actually show you what your HTML structure might look like, right? And then if you follow that, they also show you kind of like the basic CSS you could use to structure it that way. I'm not saying this is the best approach, but they do get into this, right? Then they show you a different type of layout. So like, for example, that's a 2-column layout. Here's 2 columns with a left nav, right? And then they kind of show you the wireframing for it and some techniques, including structure. Now, this is stuff that you can superfluously absorb, but what I'd like you to start doing is start thinking about what your website layout will really look like. If you don't really have a vision, what I would suggest is look at websites you like and go, oh, all right, well, there's columns here. Oh, okay. It's all one thing, or whatever. But start to look at stuff critically and I mean, even take a look here at Brightspace. What's Brightspace's layout? Well, there's a header, doesn't go all the way across, you notice. There's a nav that kind of seems, well, it goes all the way across, but it kind of stops here. And then there's a left navigation here. And then there's a content area, right? And so you could wireframe that pretty easy. And the task and the assignment is basically come up with a way to lay out your page. Now, typically what I ask people to do with this is to use graphics tools to kind of come up with a wireframing layout. And there's a bunch of them you can use. And so what I did inside here, when we get to wireframing, I do suggest a couple of tools. Figma is a tool that you just Google these names, by the way. And notice that like this one is used on the Mac OS. Balsamic is one where you can do a free trial, by the way. And Figma is one that a lot of web designers use because it is free. And I'm just going to kind of go to the website really quick without doing a full demo on it. But you can just click on this, sign in with your Google account, give them all your privacy information there, whatever it takes to work for free, and then it drops you into their tool just this quickly. And on top of it all, and this is really kind of the blowaway thing about this tool, is they now have AI built in. And you could say, website wireframe, and they will help you along in the process here. And you can see their AI engine is kicking in. And they didn't used to have this here, by the way, but I want you to notice that it's writing code on the left. And it's building a whole website structure. And this is really impressive stuff, Okay, now you're gonna say, like, why do I need to go to school? But I want you to notice how many divs it's building. I'm really curious to see what it creates. I didn't realize it was going to go this far and actually build out the whole site. Right. And now it's asking me questions. But you'll notice what it's doing is it's giving me this really rough look of a website. And it's kind of like, oh my God, right? Like it like not only did all this stuff, but here's kind of the, like, you might like this or not like it. And you can say something like, I need something much more simple, like a 2-column layout or something like that, and you can get in there and get descriptive, and it'll rebuild it. Now, ultimately, really what I would prefer that you do, because this is actually like writing code and everything in the background. So not only can you design it, but you get the code structure for it, which I'm not really kind of keen on you guys doing at this point. But you can also get into this tool and you can build stuff from scratch, and they'll give you, examples that you can pull from and build within the environment. I'm sorry, my demo on this is not so great because they have significantly changed the interface. So let's take a really quick look at Balsamic, and I'm trying to do this efficiently here. And this is, once again, not a free product, but this is one that professionals use quite a bit. And once again, you can try it for free. And I should already have an account, but I'll just go through the process to show you. I'm just giving it a name for right now. And I want you to notice this is a free trial. Oh my gosh. Other, thank you. All right. Let's try to get the screens out of the way. But I'm going to tell you why I like this product, because this product starts out with a blank screen. And so, for example, if I wanted, for example, to create, let's say, a browser window, I can just drop it onto the screen. Pretty slick, right? And then I can start creating ideas, right? So like if I want, for example, a rectangle, that might be my header. There I go. And then I want a title. And then I want I don't know, menu bar. And you notice what it does. It allows you to very quickly go, oh yeah, that would look good over here. And then the nice thing is I can pick the stuff up. I can move it around. I can resize it. I can change the fonts, the positions, the colors, whatever. And I can start to design things. What I will tell you is you do not need to get this fancy. And the problem with this trial version is you can't export this as a file, but you can screen capture it. So that's one way to create a wireframe. Another approach, real frankly, is to use what's built into your Google Drive, where you can create a new Google drawing, and you can create a wireframe right here, right? So you can use, you notice that they have shape tools here where I can make, rectangles. I can drop in text. I can drop in images. And really, what I'm looking for mostly is the rough idea of what you're going to create. If you struggle with graphics tools, right? For example, like you could use Photoshop if you were that adept to create something that looks like a real website, and then build a website based upon that design. You could do that, right? I've also had people take a piece of paper, draw their idea out on a piece of paper, snap a picture with their phone. That's fine too. The concept really is, show me what your structure is, because once I understand the structure, then I can code it, right? And once again, it's kind of like having a blueprint for a house before you start buying materials and building it. It helps to have the blueprint first. And designers will get really deep into this and not build a website until they have a solid design in place. So please make an attempt at that assignment. You can try some of these tools if you wish, but kind of the point is, show me the website you want to build in its rough form. It does not need to look like a finished product. Very rough, like this is the header, this is the nav, this is the content, this is the footer, this is my sidebar, this is my image. And then, oh, this page will look a little different. It'll be like this. And that page will look a little different. It'll look like this. And I want you to ideate that and make some rough drawings of it as part of your design exercise. Things that you want to think about, right, when you're building a site. Okay, so for example, why do most websites have their navigation at the top? This is a consideration, because that's where we're used to looking at it. When I got into this field and we started building websites, navigation was almost always on the left side of the screen, right? I have seen websites where people put it on the right. I have seen websites where people put it on the bottom, right? That's not where we normally look, but it does happen. Brightspace is a really good example where we have navigation on the top and on the left, right? And that can be useful for a complicated website. The other thing to think about is, what is it going to look like on your phone? I don't know if you guys have tried this yet, but once you put your work up on Prometheus, you can pull up the browser on your phone and take a look at your web page and go, oh, that's not bad. Or, oh my God, that's horrible. Right. The other, of course, approximation, right, and I've been doing this all along, is to take your page and narrow it up in the browser, right? And you can kind of see what it looks like on your phone. That's kind of a phone view without getting into it. So that's definitely a possibility. The other thing to think about too, and I want you to read this content more than just listen to me talk about it here. I'm just trying to get the browser back up on the screen. But I want you to also look at this little web accessibility article on W3 Schools. One of the reasons that we also add semantic tags is for accessibility issues, because it tells screen readers what content the user is looking at if they can't see it. Color contrast should be very strong. Why do we put black text on a white background? Because it's very easy to read. Or why do we put white text on a black background? For the same reason. If you have like dark gray text on a dark background, well, that's not good, right? Contrast is really important. Also, it's kind of a thing too that people are building in keyboard navigation to websites these days. Also, don't forget to add alt text to all your images, and then read through that article, right? And accessibility concerns are very important. Any like big company or public facing institution usually insists on their website being accessible, right? I know Gateway does for sure, right? Even within Brightspace, the content needs to be accessible because we don't know what kind of student we have, right? And it is important for stuff to be easy to absorb. All right. That covers all the lecture materials, folks. So make sure that you try some of the coding techniques that I demonstrated. I am going to keep the session going here for a little bit. If you the class is technically done, so if you need to go, you can go. But I'm going to do a couple of tweaks to my site and adjust it a little bit, and then I'm going to publish it and add a link to my launch page so you guys can access it. So you're welcome to hang out if you want. If you want to go, you're free to go, and I will see you guys next week. All right, so I did want to do a couple more tweaks to the site now that all the students have left. Apparently, they almost have a 750 class, which I totally get. I just wanted to clean up the look of it a little bit and try a couple of different things. I encourage you guys to do the same thing. The first thing is I really am not liking the header, right? And I think I'm going to remove those H2s and H3s from them. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm also not going to use an H1 tag here at the top. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch this to a span tag, which is one of the ones that we were talking about, so that I can actually have a greater level of control. And I also kind of have this ideation in my head that what I would prefer to do on the page, right, is have like the logo maybe up here and have it say Green Bay Packers, or maybe I'll center it. I'm not really quite sure yet. And then make that whole thing smaller, right? And I think that would be a better look. I also am going to get rid of the grass background, and I'm going to use it, I think, here in the background of the body. And I'll show you this like step by step. So let's just kind of take it one little piece at a time here. All right, so I got rid of that, and this with this span, I'm going to say I'm going to give it an ID. I think is probably appropriate here. One single use, and we'll call it header text. Let's save that right away. And that this is just on the index page now. So I'm just going to look at the index page. At this point, I'm going to mute my camera. I hope you guys don't mind. I'm sure you don't, because I don't want to look at myself right now. All right, so here we are. Let's go to the homepage and notice. Okay, so we're kind of getting there, right? This is not exactly pretty yet, but we'll make it pretty. And once again, I'm going to remove the grass background, and I think I'm going to just switch to maybe like something complementary to the logo. So I'm not really sure what that is yet, but you know, my default would be to go for that dark Packer green, but that might not work with this so well. But maybe it will. Let's just try it. Right, that's how you figure it out. So let's go to the header here. And right now we have a background image. And I think I said this before, I'm going to take this and I'm going to put this actually as a background for the body. That should be interesting. So we're going to have a background image instead. Let's take a look at that really quick, right? Well, there it is. Now both of those have it. It is tiling, so I'm not sure that'll keep it, but for now. Right. All right. So then down here in the header, and you can see I'm kind of bouncing here. I'm going to do a background color instead. And if I knew the actual Packer green color, I would put it in. Oh, let's just go with forest green. Let's just see what that looks like, right? Refresh. All right. Not the nicest thing, but hey, let's Let's keep tweaking it. Not altogether bad either. I might go with something really, really, really dark green. Let's just go with that. Saving, refreshing. Okay, makes my logo look a little weak. And certainly we've got to work on the text. So let's make the letters bigger and make them contrast more with the background. So dark gray is not appropriate. So what did we call that? We called that header text. So I'm going to add this ID to my CSS file. And I'm going to put that near the header stuff. I think that's a good spot for it. So # header text, open close curly brackets, and let's get the color of the font changed. And I'm not really sure what's quite right here. Let's try that antique white. Right, that will certainly contrast with the background, and the font's got to be a lot bigger, right? So let's just say font size, and let's just pick a pixel amount here. Let's go with I'm arbitrarily picking a number, 42 pixels, and we'll adjust from there. Saving and refreshing. All right, Green Bay Packers, getting there, right? All right, let's now see if is there a way that I could take that text and lift it up a little bit, right? And what's happening here is, keep in mind, this is an example of inline elements. Even though this one is appearing above this one in the code, they're a span tag and an anchor tag are both inline, right? So they will appear one after each other on the screen. And then the text by default will sit at the bottom of the baseline of where the text normally sits. And then the height of the line is really controlled by the image, which is taller than the text. So I think I need to make some tweaks. I could either make the text really, really tall. I mean, I guess that's one approach. In fact, we could try that. Let's make it like a 142 pixels tall and refresh. All right. Well, yeah, it kind of works though. Right? Maybe that's a little excessive, but notice how I took care of that issue. Okay, maybe it's a little excessive. All right. Let's maybe drop that down. Let's make it like, let's go with 50 pixels for now. Refresh. But then I might want to lift that up. So I might actually add, and this is kind of weird, a padding to the bottom of, I don't know, 20 pixels. And this is the kind of stuff you wrestle with as a designer, by the way. And notice that had no effect, right? Because this is really not necessarily containerized. And if I started looking at the background styles on this, this is a problem with the sizing element of this. So this is not going to work, right? This approach. So what could I do? Would a margin work? And if your brain is already saying no, you're starting to think about how this technology works a little bit, right? And that doesn't work either. So what we would have to do is adjust it in a little bit different kind of way. So what I've been playing with here is trying to figure out how to center this vertically and without getting into positioning commands, which we're supposed to learn next week. What I am going to do is I'm going to go with that really big font size. I think that's probably a good temporary fix for now. I won't go as big as I had it before. And that might even be a little bit big. Right. Let's maybe go with 100 or something like that. Not too bad, right? There's a bunch of things I can do to make this look better, but like I said, positioning wise, I think this, it's not too bad overall. I might also here actually include maybe a little bit. I'm going to add a space in front of it. That should render. Let's see. Didn't render. So I would put in a non-breaking space here. And maybe even a couple. I just want to move it over just a tad. This is in lieu of not learning the positioning command, so just be mindful of that. Just move it a little bit. All right. You may love it or hate it, but you got to admit it looks a little bit better than it did before. All right. The other thing that I think is kind of ugly right now is the background color and in this box. So let's fix that too. So we got to find the wrapper, the background color, and let's tweak that. And I'm not really sure what a good color is here. We can kind of go with sort of like a Packard, kind of a Packard gold, and I'm trying to get like in the sweet spot there. But I'm not sure it should be like that kind of intense or like that. So maybe we just soften it up just a little bit. That might be okay. Right. So let's just go with that. Let's save it and let's refresh. And that I think that's even too bright, honestly. A little more softening. So let's go here, saving, refreshing. Yeah, that's a little better, right? But the general point is here, start tweaking this stuff and playing with it a little bit. Since I do want a consistent look from page to page to page, what I will do is I will apply those styling techniques, or it's the structural techniques actually, that I did here in my header. I want my headers to be consistent from page to page. So I'm going to copy this header and place it on all the other pages as well. And this is to keep that consistent structure. And then I'm going to go back through and I'm going to format all the pages. If you guys are yelling at me right now in your head that, hey, that's not like, this is indented or whatever. So on each one of these now, I'm going to do a Control A, a right click, format document, right? And it fixes all the hierarchies, right? And I'll do that with all the pages. And then I will save everything. So I'll do a save all. And then let's go back to the browser. I'm going to go full screen. So refreshing. Here's home, contact, about, and my code page. Right? And then you'll notice it is looking a lot more consistent. I'm not super crazy about the background right now because I can see where it's repeating. And we'll talk about ways to fix that. But you got to admit it's getting better. It's looking a little bit cleaner. And I want you guys to experiment with this stuff and then start thinking about your site design. That will end this video, folks. I will be publishing this, so this will be available for you guys to look at the backend code if you want to mimic it or borrow some of the ideas. And I will see you guys next week.